Yesterday, my wife and I went to go see Baahubali the Epic, so let's talk about it. While I'm talking, be sure to join me down below in the comment section. Let me know, what did you think about Baahubali the Epic, and give me that point of reference. Have you seen the original versions of the films? Was this your first exposure to Baahubali? As for me, my wife and I were huge fans of RRR, but we hadn't seen Baahubali prior to this, either film. And that was ended up being kind of intentional. When I realized they were going to do a re-release, I wanted to see it on the big screen, because obviously these movies play fantastic on the big screen, and seeing an Indian film with a packed theater is also a very exciting, fun way to watch a movie. And so I wanted to see it in that format with an audience on the biggest screen possible, and we saw it at a pretty full theater on XD, so huge screen, awesome experience. But I have not seen the original version, so I don't have that point of reference to compare the two. I'm watching this as a first-time viewing of this edited version of the two movies into one 4-hour film. With all of that said, let's get started with the good. And simply put, once the movie got going and you started diving into the backstory of everything taking place, I just kept thinking to myself, man, what a movie. Because it's such mythological and epic storytelling. It is telling this enormous, sweeping tale of betrayal, treachery, honor, and it's just very timeless, universal, epic storytelling. It's the stuff that legends have always been constructed of across all cultures. This is the sort of thing that makes for thrilling, exciting stories of the chosen one, the lost son, the returning king, and the family members competing for a throne, and the backstabbing that goes along with it, the misunderstandings. It deals with so many different universal, large-scale themes and storytelling, all in this one massive story that it's telling. And you start watching it and you feel like you're watching one type of story. And it is that movie. It's story. It is that movie entirely you think you're watching, and then it adds something else on top of it. And it keeps adding layer upon layer of density to the experience that you're watching and what this movie means. A large percentage of Indian movies that I've watched use kind of like extensive flashback structures, where you get to after the intermission, you do kind of a flashback and you tell the backstory that got us to this point in time. I don't think I've ever watched a movie that did it as extensively as this film, where you're following one journey of trying to stop a tyrant, rescue a princess, and then you do the flashback that makes up 60% of your story is then the flashback to explain everything. And it manages to do it in a way that builds so much intrigue surrounding all of these kind of characters and what's kind of going on. Where you start off with a mysterious woman carrying a baby. You assume it's the mother at the beginning of the film. You assume she's carrying her own child. And she, in kind of her opening sacrifice that she makes, she speaks of her sins and the mistakes that she's made and trying to make it right. And you're like, okay, I wonder, what does that mean? It just kind of raises a question in your head, kind of like, who is she and what are these sins that she's referring to? And you don't really get an answer to that for such a long time. And you don't fully understand the significance of everything you're watching for such a long time. But as you go through it, you start to realize, wait a minute. Oh, this is what it's referring to. Oh, and adds so much weight to what's taking place. You're watching it the whole time knowing at some point in time there's going to be some betrayal where someone's going to die. And you assume you know who it is. You assume it's this one person, it happens in one specific way. And then it's revealed long before the betrayal happens, And the person that's the betrayer is the complete opposite person from who you think it's going to be. And you're like, how on earth are we going to loop back to that? Like, how is that going to work? How are we going to get to that moment? And it keeps both spoiling what's coming ahead, letting you know what's happening, but in a way that doesn't spoil anything. It just builds so much intrigue around the story that you're watching that you're really invested in these specific characters and all of these power dynamics and character flaws of some of these characters, that from the opening of it, someone says, don't make this child pay for my sins. And you're like, what does that mean? What are these things that she did? And you're like, you finally start to realize it in this version of it. 3 hours later, 3 hours later, you're finally like, oh man, there it is. Why did you do that? Oh, what? How could you not see what you're doing was wrong? But that's like the epic sweeping storytelling. Of course, my points of reference, coming from Western culture, United States, but there's parts of it that are like Indian Lord of the Rings, with the returning king, and there's parts of it that are very much reminiscent of Moses and freeing the Israelites from Egypt, and there's parts of it that are reminiscent of Shakespearean drama, but that's because these are all universal epic tales that have crossed cultures, that have crossed time. And not to say that this is even saying that Baahubali is inherently inspired by any of the things I just referenced, but except to say that it's tying into these universal stories that are just so powerful, that have captivated mankind. And this movie kind of pulls a bunch of them all together into this one sweeping epic tale. And even beyond that, I mean, there's love, and there's love triangles, and there's surrogate fathers and adopted mothers, like so many different things that just so primal and universal to all of our experiences. And then that's just kind of on the nature of the storytelling and why it evokes kind of big excitement, thrills, but also the scale and the size of the battles in this thing are just crazy. Both of these movies feature just incredibly epic battles. Once again, referring back to Lord of the Rings, of like, what other movies in cinematic history have shown battles at this scale? In both halves of this, you can see how each movie's big crescendo battle, but whether you're talking about I don't remember the name of the group, the barbarian hordes that attack in the first film, where the two princes are trying to prove they're the worthy brother to get the throne. And it's just so huge, just incredibly large scale battles, and captured in a way where you can understand the dynamics of everything. You can see action taking place. You can understand objectives and goals. It's visualized in a way where it's not confusing. It's huge, but it also still feels personal because we're following these two different people competing to kill the main guy or capture the main bad guy, depending on which one goals they have. And it's personal stakes. So it keeps it so you have objectives that are clear right in front of you. So you're invested in it on a personal level, not just on a grand scope level. While the grand scope is incredible. And then, of course, in the back half of it, the rebellion against the tyrant ruler. And once again, just a massive kingdom, huge armies, arrows, catapults, all just enormous scale action. Just kind of wild and wacky enough where, we're using catapults to shoot flags and burning people alive. We're catapulting people in shields, there's an elevated side to it that's mythological and beyond normal physics, but not so much so that it detaches you from reality. So just very thrilling, exciting action that is massive in size, but manages to be personal, have clear objectives all along the way that we're working towards, and just like powerful moments in each of them that matter, whether who wins who gets revenge, how you get revenge, how we're defeating someone, just like toppling of statues, like all these things that have tremendous meaning, and things that were like at the beginning, the declaration of a character becomes an objective hours later in the finale of the whole thing, where it's just constructed so well. Just kind of on the look of things, of course, it's huge in scope and size. It feels like one of the biggest movies I've ever seen. Just like massive in the world we're exploring, in the mountains, the snow, all these environments, these huge kingdoms, these massive statues. But then even just kind of there's nice uses of color all throughout, whether you're talking about the way that like there's all these sequences with flashes of like powder or blood in a way that just kind of has a beauty to it, and just like vibrant colors thrown into different environments that just, movies are a visual storytelling format, and they find a way to just make it come alive. And then the last one, of course, you got to talk about on here is our lead actor, Prabhas as Baahubali, both Baahubalis, and just kind of someone that is able to, in a single stare, command respect. And that's like almost the characteristic that the character requires, that you have to buy into him as the person that would earn the respect of his armies, but also as the junior version of him that's coming out from nowhere, that once again, as someone just emerging, that people would be immediately sense the importance of him and trust him, and being able to do that with a look. I've seen him in several other movies. I'm thinking my wife and I have seen probably about 20 Indian films. I've seen Salar and Kalki 2898. This is probably the one where he was for me, had the most gravitas to him. Now, that's built into the character because it is the nature of the story that is so mythological, and the character commands so much respect. But for me, this is the one where it's like, wow, this is just like cut through in a way that perhaps I didn't notice him doing as much so in those other films. But I mean, I think he did a great job in those movies too. But the nature of this movie just like amplifies him up as this powerful character. So I went into it with pretty high expectations because I was such a big fan of RRR. I'd heard amazing things from so many different people. So many people were recommending it to me. So I went in with really high expectations, but not really knowing what to expect. And it absolutely lived up to my expectations. It really was a big, sweeping, epic, true to the title of this version of the film. There were a couple things that didn't work for me, so let's move on to the bad. And the first thing you have to mention here is that at least one point in time in the movie, it was painfully obvious where they shrunk the story and compressed the storytelling. Specifically, when Baahubali scales the mountain up the waterfall and discovers the resistance, it like literally gives a voiceover and it montages through what feels like a whole bunch of really important plot points so that we can like get to him in his story. And I can understand if you're telling this in two different stories, how you have to compress something has to be cut. And this kind of love story in this little transition point, it's the details of it aren't really that important. They're not. And so if you had to cut something, it made sense, but it was also, as a first-time viewer, it was like, oh man, is the whole movie going to be like this? Is it every 30 minutes it's going to pause to like speed run through really important plot points? I will say, not having seen both versions, that was the only point in time where I just like was like staring at something being like, you rushed through that. That was the only time it was super duper obvious. There are other times it was a little bit more subtly obvious, or it felt like maybe we were compressing something. But that one point, I was like, that didn't play very well. That was very distracting because I saw what you were doing while you were doing it. The other thing that really stood out to me and took me out of the movie is that several of the digital environments and the digital stand-ins were incredibly distracting. Not on the big epic stuff, not on the stuff that I would think would be difficult to do. Like the huge battles I thought looked really good, but like early on in the movie, they're like training in like a mini little coliseum or something like that isn't that complex. And there's only a few like characters off in the background, and they're very clearly digital stand-ins that weren't moving. And so I'm watching it, and all I could focus in on was like, this is clearly a fake environment. That's clearly a fake person. And I can tell because they have not moved in 3 minutes. And as soon as you notice it once, you start noticing it over and over again. And it always felt like it was the less busy scenes, the scenes that felt like they probably would have been easier to program. That was less is happening, so you don't need that person to move as much for it to make all the difference. That's where I noticed it. It was the big, huge, the battles where there's tons of movement. It was fine. But it was the smaller ones that are more dialogue outside in these coliseums where you could just tell, like, all right, all of that beyond this line is all digital and it's stagnant. And because it's stagnant, I'm paying attention to it in the wrong way. And some of that's just the technology's probably evolved a whole lot over the last 10 years to be able to make that more vibrant in more recent films. But it absolutely was something that I noticed, in particular in the first quarter of the movie. I noticed it a lot. I didn't notice it as much afterwards, but early on it was like, there's a lot in here that's just stagnant, which was distracting. And that's why I bring it up. But honestly, like on a storytelling level, I haven't seen the other version, obviously, but other than some slight compression here and there of the story for the sake of this version of it, like I just thought it was a very engaging film that made me mad at people, root for people, want revenge. Like I felt all the things I was supposed to feel. A huge, gigantic triumph. Overall, I'll give it an A- on the entertainment scale, a 9 out of 10, and I'll say this is a must-see. And I would assume those numbers would probably bump up just a little bit if I saw the full versions of each of these, which would correct some of the pacing issues and the compression issues. I have reviewed quite a few other Indian movies. You can check them out right over here in this playlist. I've even done a few rankings. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies and TV.